Okay, we'll get started with this evening here. I'll start with praying. Father, thank you that we get to come together and learn how to grieve well with hope in you and how to help others grieve well with hope in you. God, I pray that you would be with me as I speak and that you would be with everybody here listening. Lord, just may we all be blessed through this material, and may it help us in our future ministries, in our lives. Lord, may we become more like Jesus through this. In your Son's name I pray, amen. All right, we're at our second workshop on grief here. So I just wanted to start with looking at sort of a theme verse. I don't know if I'll call it that yet, but that's what it is for now. 1 Thessalonians 4, verses 13. If somebody could pull that up and read it.
Verse 13.
Yes.
But we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers, about those who are asleep, that you may not grieve as others do who have no hope.
All right, I'll say it again. As Christians, it's a good thing to grieve, but we're distinct from others who do because we can have hope while we do it. Last month, we looked a bit at what we can bring with us into the grieving process, so kind of what happens before we grieve, and how the best time to prepare for it is before it happens. The best time to prepare for a storm on a ship is before you even set sail. And so, everybody grieves differently. We talked a bit about that. And we looked at beginning steps to dealing with grief, like you're just setting your foot in the door, basically. We also discussed a bit about helping others in their grief, particularly when it comes to how we just need to say something as a starting principle. We shouldn't be silent for fear of saying the wrong thing necessarily, or maybe we don't think we have anything helpful. People need to know that we notice they're grieving, and we do that. We help them know that by saying something. And we discuss some principles to start with for what to say. After last month, I realized some people might be able to come to that and think, now I know how to grieve and how to help others grieve. That was the first workshop of probably 8. So we'll be learning more about things such as dealing with feelings of loneliness, adjusting to your new reality, dealing with people who aren't helpful. We're learning how to be helpful comforters, but there are some people who aren't, and we should be able to deal with them too if we are grieving. Grieving with your family, dealing with regret, correcting our view of God, and more in that realm. And we'll also be looking at how we need to be there for those who grieve, what might keep us away from others while they're grieving, and what we can do to help. There will actually be a spot on social media in terms of helping others grieve, and how we talk about heaven and hell with those who are grieving, and more. And just as a reminder for the structure here, the workshops will start with testimony, talk about how to grieve, have a break, and then go into how to help others who are grieving. So to start, I want to invite up my wife, Jerilee Hamada, to share. Would you like to introduce yourself real quick?
Hi, my name is Jerilee Hamada. I am married to this man, and I attend this church. Really quick preference. Dylan last month talked about being vulnerable, so I get to practice it right now, right here. And then I think it was Doug Harkness also said that God gave us tear ducts for a reason, so I'll probably be using mine tonight. And you guys get to also be surrounded and faced with someone who's crying, so we get to all learn together.
So the first question is, what were your first encounters with grief?
Yes. I was pretty young. I came home from like playing in the neighborhood with some friends, and my dad was at the kitchen table sobbing. And I think that was like the first memory I had of my dad actually just like sitting somewhere crying so publicly. And my mom was comforting him. And I was really like confused because I was like, why is my dad crying? I asked him, and he just told me that like his nephew passed away, and his nephew was pretty close in age to my dad. And it was very sudden. It was an accident. And I remember wanting to comfort him, but not knowing how. And I think I said, it's going to be okay. Because months prior, I had a pet that died, and that's what they told me. My mom quickly taught me that maybe that's not the best thing to say, that it's going to be okay, but like, I'm sorry for your loss. And then I think that's when I really started to wrestle with the fact that like, it's not only animals that die, but people also die. And I was like, okay, that's a reality now in my life.
How have you seen your family handle grief?
That's a great question. I think I've seen like an array of emotions. So I get to see a lot of my extended family pretty regularly. I get to see my grandparents' siblings and their kids. So I would call them my aunts and uncles, and their kids are my cousins, even though I don't even know the term, third, fourth cousins. So I've seen like an array of emotions for funerals and wakes. I've seen people come in totally drunk out of their mind, barely able to stand, in denial. I've seen people cry over the casket, sobbing, also in denial. I've seen people who just put on a brave face and pretend like everything is okay, and then maybe shed a few tears in public, but more go through it privately. I've sat with my grandma and seen her grieve, and it just was like very, just cry when you cry and feel it when you feel it, but just keep living when you're living. And I've also seen people like go to counseling and seek help in all those ways.
How do First Nations people grieve, and what do you think we could learn from that?
So for lots of funerals I've gone to, there's usually like a wake. It's usually ranges from like, the shortest I've been to is 1 day, but that was because the body had an autopsy and it was already a delayed funeral. And then it's been like 1 day to 4 days. And basically it's just a time, it happens in a house or a gym, like a school gym, a hall. And it's just a time where the casket is open, if it's able to be open, and people come and view the body. People are there from like all hours of the day, midnight, past midnight, to like 6 a.m. in the morning. It's just a time to sit with the community and family and grieve as like a whole group of people for days, and not just 1 day of a funeral and then we move on. This is my normal. So actually when Dylan's mom passed away and we had a week for the siblings to prepare the funeral kind of alone, and then we had a day of like one funeral where we saw extended family, I actually realized for the first time it really threw me for a loop, because I'm used to like, you don't have any responsibilities during the wake usually. Like you can help. I know I've helped in the kitchen, make sandwiches, because we also share meals together. Usually people will donate food and we just share meals together and we sit together. And it was the first time that I was like, wow, that was really quick and sudden. And I don't think grief works that way, to have just 1 day of like, this is the day. Now we have to keep going with our life and go back to our jobs. So having those few days, it's my normal to just sit there. And like my dad's reserve, so each reserve does do it differently. My dad's reserve is a sober reserve, which means they don't do any drinking or alcohol and drugs or like gambling. So when you're at the wake, you can't actually like play cards with people. So usually it's like, oh, there's puzzles. There's also a really big Catholic presence in his reserve. So usually like people come and do gospel songs, and they do like midnight mass. Is that what it's called? Yeah. And then my mom's reserve, it's like me and Dylan will bring board games because there's tables set up, and we just play card games and board games with my nephews and nieces and younger cousins, and just people come in, they view the body, they give their condolences to the family, and then you just sit and visit and share stories. And it's a mixture of a lot of laughter, because usually the stories are pretty good, but then also the freedom to cry together and grieve together in that way.
Can you tell us about your experiences with grief during your time at NBC?
Yeah, so my first year at Bible college, I lost my aunt. She had cancer, and once we found out she had cancer, she went pretty quickly. And when I came to NBC, I really didn't want to be at NBC. So then when this happened, I was pretty upset because I felt like I was being obedient to God, and then my aunt passed away, and I was so far from my home. And like I said, I feel like as a community, we grieve as a family for like a week, and it was really hard to then leave my family and be so far from my family. And then I think in my brain, so like my aunt had some mental disabilities, so she actually lived with her brother, my uncle, for the majority of her life once their parents passed away, and he was like her sole caregiver. So he never got married, and like his sole responsibility was taking care of his sister. So in my brain, because before I went to Bible college, I remember my parents being like, okay, like, Uncle Albert's getting old. Like, I think you have to start preparing for him potentially passing away. And I was like, okay, got it. But then when my aunt passed away, it was like, whoa, this was not the order of events. And then when she passed away, in my brain, I was like, since my aunt passed away, it only makes sense that my uncle will live for a few years. Like, that's the only fair thing. It would be unfair for him to then pass away. And then I think she passed away in December, and he passed away in February in his sleep. And it was very I remember being filled with so much anger and so much confusion. And yes, and just so confused on why I was being obedient to God and going to Bible college. And then this was all happening 4 hours away. Sorry, Phoenix up here. Yes, it's okay. I'll just cry. It's going to keep happening anyways. Oh, thank you. And then I remember just being, angry and confused and upset. And then after probably a year of I went back for a second year, even though I really didn't want to. But the Lord had plans, and he obviously is, his plan's better than my plan. And in my second year, I started to really work through my anger and my everything, and start to really delve into who God is and his characteristics and who I am in Christ. And I think that really helped me just really realize that God is unchanging, God is a loving God, God is a just God, and God is faithful. And even though it was very shocking to lose these two people, it was like God's plan is way better than my plan will ever be. So I just need to trust him and surrender and grieve. Yes, that's all.
Moving to after your time at NBC, what were your experiences with grief, and how did God use what he taught you in your previous experiences to help you there?
Yes. So I think the first time after Bible college, my cousin committed suicide, and it was very sudden. And it was the first time that I really had to apply what I was taught at Bible college with who God was and how I need to surrender and trust him and his plan. And I really had to not dwell in the eternalness of it, as far as my cousin. And then my sister got sick with cancer and passed away. And it was really a moment where I was very thankful that the Lord used my time at NBC to prepare me for that, because then it was all this head knowledge. I had a moment where I was okay, this could either be just head knowledge and I could just trust in this and keep repeating it to myself over and over and over, or it could become heart knowledge and I could actually choose to trust in this and choose to rejoice in God's goodness. Rejoice in God's goodness and rejoice in his plan and in his faithfulness and in his unchanging, and that I could just surrender that and trust him. And I think that made that whole process tenfold easier, because I was able just to actually experience joy in that, and the salvation I've been given and the hope I've been given, and the fact that I know the God who knows what's going to happen and knew what was going to happen and still knows what's going to happen and has been faithful in my life time and time again. Yes. And also, I should mention, at the Bible college, I was surrounded by people who believed in the Lord and pointed me back to him. And then when I was with, when my sister passed away, me and Dylan were more isolated as far as, just a very different context versus when you're in Bible college, living with people and sharing meals with people, versus when you're married and in a different community. And I think that really prepared us to be okay, where are our eyes focused on, and where are we going to when we're grieving and experiencing everything?
What were the least helpful and most helpful things that others did to either hurt or help you in your grief?
I think for something unhelpful, I guess, that comes to my brain is it was really hard for people to ask where, if they've heard the gospel or if they were believers, because I'm not from a Christian home, so there's a good chance that they did not believe in God, and I know that. Or there's also a chance that they called out to the Lord, because there was opportunities for them to hear the gospel with just me talking with them, or at our wedding, or at the grad, and just in those type of things. And I think it was really hard for people who knew me from before I was a Christian and knew my background and knew my family history to then ask, because it was a big thing that I had to surrender, and not knowing, and knowing that I could get really fixated, is that the word? Fixated on it. And I knew that I could just dwell on things that I might not never know the answer to in this life and in this side of it. And I think it was just a very hard thing to keep getting asked and have to be this is my answer. Yes. I think.
What was most helpful?
Was most helpful? I think people just sitting with me and allowing me to grieve and allowing me to feel the emotions I was feeling and cry when I needed to cry. And yes, just people saying something versus not saying anything was really helpful. Yes.
And how do you still experience your grief today?
There's months where I'm fine and I don't cry when I talk about my grief. And there is months where I'm like this and I cry and I feel things. I mean, I still feel things when I don't cry. But, I mean, yeah, you guys know what I mean. Nod your heads if you know what I mean. Thank you. And I think it's just going to be, I think big ways I feel my grief is milestones in my own life and in Callie's life, I think is a big one. Yes. Especially with my sister, of just things I want to tell her and things that I'm experiencing or that Callie does, because before, when Callie did anything funny or anything a little sassy, the first person I told was my sister. And yes, so I think those are the big ways I grieve. Like after, I think I did grieve for like probably, would you say a year and a half? A year and a half. So I think now it's like I'm starting to get back to who I once was, in the sense of like things that I used to find a lot of joy in, I began to find really draining. And now it's starting to get back to the point where I'm like, oh, this is actually exciting to go to this big group thing and meet new people and do the things that I actually genuinely did enjoy. Yes. Any clarifications in that? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. What one truth about God do you think you clung to the most in your grief?
That God is a faithful God, and He was a faithful God, and He is a faithful God, and He will forever be a faithful God. And in that means that He is unchanging, and I can trust and rely on that throughout my life, no matter what happens, or what season we go through, or any experience we have, that God is faithful and unchanging through it all.
I'll pray for you and then you go. Father, thank you for Jeralee and that she shared. Lord, I pray that her testimony would be helpful to us. God, thank you for how you have worked in her life. Thank you for how you've comforted her, how you've taught her about yourself, and how you've even helped her through your people. Lord, I pray that you would be glorified by her through her life, by her testimony. In your Son's name I pray. Amen. Thanks. I hope that was helpful to all of us. As we heard a bit from her, she spent about a year and a half not quite being herself. And as we saw, she's clearly still grieving. And we've talked about how we prepare for the time we'll grieve before it comes, setting our foot in the door, and from today onward, we'll be spending the rest of these workshops discussing different elements of how we process that grief in the midst of it. I think as we saw from her testimony there, one of the questions in the mind of a lot of people grieving is something along the lines of, will this pain ever end? We already talked a bit about this, how it doesn't completely go away. But the pain does lessen over time. It just won't go away completely. So I'm wondering if we could think of some factors that would determine how long and severe our pain would be in our grief. This is the point where we can share some answers we might have.
A relationship with someone lost.
Yeah, the relationship with the person that we lost.
Maybe if it was sudden or something that was expected.
The circumstances of their death, yeah.
The fallout of their death, like for sure you guys taking care of Callie will shape your grief differently than if you didn't have that afterwards, right? So.
Yeah, the fallout. And plain and simple, just who that person we lost is.
We don't have a relationship with God, or like Jeremy was saying, our perspective, God doesn't change. And I maybe have mentioned you, certainly mentioned how there's like disorientation in describing after my wife died. But God was my true north, just knowing there is one stable thing in my life that I can cling to desperately. Unsaved people don't have that. And it's easy for us to forget that they are disoriented with knowing. They have nothing. And they often, I don't know what often, it seems they often turn to something to dull the pain, and that's where the drugs and alcohol and self-abuse come in.
We're actually going to talk about that today.
You're in a limbo state. Without God, it's dangerous.
Yeah, your relationship with God, and if you do have one with Him, how much you let Him comfort you, even. I think the age of the person who died, there's quite the difference between a child dying at a young age, or even Jerry's sister was only 37, I think. And she, by a lot of people's standards, she should have lived at least another 50 years. So there's a difference between dying young and at a ripe old age. What are some things more maybe in our control that will affect how long and severe that pain will be?
A willingness to allow other people into our lives and to help us.
Absolutely. Your willingness to allow others in and to do it in a healthy way, right? To grieve in a healthy way. Doug already brought up the having God in your life, and I mentioned how much we allow God to comfort us and direct us in our daily life during these times.
Your understanding of who God is. We're going through Ecclesiastes as a church. There's a time to be born, there's a time to die.
Yeah.
It's not that God's being mean or nasty. Scripture says that the day we're going to die is known before we're born. And it's coming for all of us. And when I think of my wife, I was just sharing this with somebody, I don't know if it was today or yesterday, recently. She got her work done and got to go home. I'm not as good at my work as she was. So it's taking me longer. You're going to have to stick around until it's done.
Yeah.
That perspective makes a difference.
And with the loss of a loved one, and it doesn't actually even just have to be death that we lose loved ones through, right? Some friendships break down, marriages break down, relationships with people break down, certain things happen. But when those could be in a way considered a death. If, say, a woman's husband abandons her, that marriage has died. And in a sense, that man has killed himself in her life, if that makes any sense. But with the loss of a loved one, you don't just lose that person, right? You lose everything associated with them. So things like that might include your hopes and dreams for them in your life and with them, the role they played in your life. It's like you said, Doug, it's so disorienting when you lose your wife. And even just in your practical daily life, I'm sure there were a lot of things she did in the house and you're, what do I do? She did this all the time, right? I know when I grieved the loss of my mom, the biggest thing was probably the conversations I used to have with her. I can't talk to anybody else the same way I've talked to her or had conversations with her anymore. So we can grieve the loss of our conversation, our favorite activities with that person, even that person's wisdom and counsel. I've heard Chris talk a lot about how his mentor has come on tougher times and he's not able to mentor him in the same capacity, and how that's been difficult for him. And especially with the loss of a spouse. could be something like, that person paid the bills. I don't know how to do that. Right? Or they did the cooking. I suck at cooking. I don't know how to feed myself. Or they did the taxes, and I don't know how to do that without them. We don't just lose the person, we lose everything associated with them. I think a good way to grieve all these kinds of losses one way is to write them down individually and individually pray for God to comfort you in those areas and to help you. But that's easier said than done, right? That opens the door to a lot of pain. And we might not want to because we're scared of the pain that we'll experience if we go through that. But each and every one of those items is an opportunity to receive comfort from the God of comfort. I think this is also a healthy exercise if we have gone through grief and maybe we haven't done this. We can go through our past inventory of things that cause us to grieve, and maybe you have loose ends you need to tie up with God and pray about and work through. With that, I'll get somebody to turn to Matthew 5, verse 4, and read that out for me, please.
Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted.
It's an interesting thing to think about, that we're in a blessed position if we're mourning. I think that's yet another reason it's better to be in the house of mourning, like Jordan said this during the sermon today. And they will be comforted. So as we are comforted by God and we start developing a new normal, and we're adjusting to life without the person we lost, it's not an easy process, but it's a necessary one for us as Christians especially, right? And even we want to receive that blessing for our mourning. What are some things that might change for us just in our lives, adjusting to our new reality, in terms of adjusting to life without someone we lost?
Daily routine, for sure.
Daily routine, yep, absolutely.
Maybe like a deep sense of emotional intimacy you have with that person.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Often difficulty during holiday seasons and birthday seasons.
Yeah, milestones and holidays, absolutely. There might even be situations where our jobs change. We can't handle the same amount of work we used to while we're grieving, things like that. Or maybe you were in a line of work with the person you lost. There's a lot of married couples who start businesses together and then it just becomes too much.
Some people, they physically relocate, they just can't stand to live in the same space.
Yeah.
Grief affects us physically. Often people have a hard time for the first few months after they've lost, struggle to remember things, struggle to think clearly, focus, concentrate on things. It can have those types of effects on us.
Yeah. Physically affects us and we become forgetful and discombobulated. And sometimes there's even actual physical bodily responses to grief where someone feels sick or something just isn't working quite right. Yeah, can't sleep.
I know some people like to listen to music.
Yep. I think family traditions are a huge thing that change. If a family member dies, maybe it's, well, Uncle Gerald always carved the turkey. Who's carving it now, right? It could be something so simple as that. Or maybe, I know in Gerald's family, there's the summer camping trip. It feels very different without Ashley, but they still go on it. Doug, did you have hobbies with your wife that seriously changed after her passing?
Our hobby seriously changed when we got married. She couldn't handle losing a board game, so.
Okay. That's...
Sorry. Real life change. Yeah, some funny things. You can't laugh too, right?
Yeah.
She would never let me put the windows down in the car because it messed up our hair. So after she died, I still would go and see my parents once a month. It's like a 4-hour drive one way. And I would take the dogs with me because I couldn't leave them at home. And with the windows open and the radio on, the male would sit on the seat and just howl. It was so much fun. Back then, I felt liberated. So did he.
Yeah. Yeah, I think leisure activities are a huge thing that changed, though, too. And even just what you can do changes, right? So there comes a point with all of these things that change, with the loss of someone we love. What things do we want to continue? What things do we want to discontinue? What things maybe need to change, but not completely, to keep going? But a lot that could be very tricky, because actually that might cause us guilt. Why might that be?
I think it's because you would love that person so much, and you miss that person so much, you would feel enjoying whatever you thought you would really enjoy. I can see myself feeling guilty over something like that. And often it's something very, very small, like it's just a small thing, but yeah.
How can I enjoy this thing if that person can't anymore, right? Yeah. And also the flip side is a lot of things we start doing, like, I don't know about you guys, but there are some hobbies I would have never got into if it wasn't for Gerald Lee. And so you get into a lot of leisure activities and different things because of the other person. And so to stop participating in that also might make you feel guilty, because that's what I did with that person. How can I stop, right? So to stop participating in a hobby, or to continue participating in a hobby, or listening to certain music or not listening to certain music anymore, or maybe you're eating at a restaurant you both liked, and maybe you're not anymore. That can feel like a betrayal of the person that you lost, right?
3 years I continued to put up all the Christmas decorations the way my wife did, until I realized this is a lot of work and I'm never home. Stop doing it. Gardening, yeah. I hate gardening. Put all the flowers in the way she liked them. I love the flowers, but I hate gardening. Stop doing it. It took me 3 years to feel that for you.
3 years, yeah. 3 years to stop. That's...
I'm sure she never came back to check on the flowers.
Yeah, so while it's uncomfortable to leave those things behind and maybe continue them, right? It doesn't mean you love the person any less. We will be talking more concretely about adjusting to our new reality next month at the workshop, but this is more of a foretaste of that. I think one last thing for that part is when we do this, when we're adjusting and we're figuring out what we're going to do, what's our next course of action going to be? What will I continue? What will I not continue? What traditions will I uphold? that we don't let others rush us and that we don't rush ourselves. If that makes sense. I mean, Doug, you certainly didn't rush yourself. It took 3 years.
Some things.
Yeah. And so grieving's a process. It takes a long time. Charlie spent 23 years growing up with her older sister. That's not going to go away overnight, right? The pain of that loss doesn't go away. But with this, we need to develop healthy ways of dealing with the pain when we're grieving, right? And I forget who it was, I think it might have been Doug, mentioned drugs and alcohol. That's an unhealthy way that people grieve. So let's just think some more. What are some more unhealthy ways that people grieve? Or they try to deal with the pain? Isolation, yeah.
Try to avoid it.
Yeah, avoiding.
Distractions.
Yeah, going for distractions, yeah.
Trying to replace that person too soon.
Yeah, trying to replace them too soon. Over shopping, that's a big one. Retail therapy is the phrase, yeah. Yeah.
Seen some people just lean into their grief way too much, like almost romanticize their grief.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to think of an example. Just maybe like keeping things that it might not be healthy for them to keep, right? Or
Yeah.
It would look different for everyone, so it's hard to give a concrete example.
Are you thinking kind of how some people might make grieving their identity? Or,
Sure.
yeah?
We have friends that lost their daughter in a car accident at a young age, and they left her. Her room was a shrine.
Mm-hmm.
Years and years and years. And I don't know if it still is, but that I don't think is healthy at all.
I know that before I was a Christian, anytime I was dealing with any kind of anxiety or suffering or something that would cause me grief, one of my escapes was sexual sin, pornography, things like that. I know there are some people who just start overworking. They try to get as many extra shifts as they can. They work themselves to death just because they can spend time thinking at their job, thinking about their work rather than the person they lost. I think another one is food. Some people have a really unhealthy relationship with food, especially when they're grieving. They just have to have their comfort food, and it becomes a vice.
Alternatively, some people might just refuse to eat anything.
Yeah, on the alternative, some people won't eat. Yeah. What do all of these things have in common?
They don't help, really.
Yeah, they don't help, that's for sure. They're all... Damien, were you going to say something?
They lack God.
They lack God, yeah, absolutely. And they're all forms of escapism. And they're trying to, rather than bring relief and comfort to the pain, it just numbs it for a time. I don't know if this is a reference many of you will get, but in The Last Samurai, this man's wife died, and he's drinking a whole bunch, and he's just drinking to forget, and finally he's at a place of withdrawal because he's in some people's care, and they won't give him any more alcohol, and he's in huge withdrawal. This guy was relying on it, and all that did was serve to turn off the pain for a time. But when it came back, it was so much more, and it didn't improve at all. And I think we see that in other people's lives. They drink to forget, and it doesn't do a thing. As soon as they sober up, they remember again, and the pain's there just as much, if not worse. And like you said, Damien, God's absent from these things. And really turning to these things is effectively saying, God isn't with me, I'm alone. So I need these things to comfort me. So the alternative, obviously, is to be comforted in a healthy way by God and actually receive relief. So what are some ways that we can do that?
Read the Word, for sure, but also get really good Christian friends that can help hold you up and even make you accountable and be accountable to them and encourage you. And even ask if you can share something, like, I think as when you are together with somebody that is grieving, for us, when we're like that, we can ask somebody, so what would you like to tell me about so-and-so? I'd like to hear something, and just, but get good friends beside, good godly Christian friends.
Yeah, surround yourself with good, godly people. You also mentioned reading the Word. I said last month, reading the Psalms can be so good to meditate on. There are Psalms of lament and people going through grief and turning to God. We have examples of how we can do that in our prayers, right?
I think it's a good point, like just being real in your prayers too.
Yeah. 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 Real, vulnerable prayer. Absolutely.
Reading other books too.
Mm-hmm. What are some activities that we can do that are good ways to be comforted by God? Yes, see someone else that needs help. Serve others. That's a great way that you can be comforted by God. I think personally that was a big one for me, being able to still serve my church in Meadow Lake when my mom died, do things for others. That was a huge thing for me.
I think like going for walks and just like being outside in nature just helps you think.
Spend time in God's creation. Yeah.
Making sure you're like regularly attending a small group.
Yeah. Being with others, small group. I think going also back to being honest with your prayers, writing in a journal. What are you feeling? What's going on? What are your questions for God? Maybe what are you learning from His Word in the time that you're spending there? Right. Another one that was really helpful for me was to listen to worship music. I forget who did the song, but it was just a song about God's goodness, even in our sorrows. And I would just play it on repeat while I'm driving around doing errands, doing anything. And that was massive for me. Are there any other things that we can think of, maybe things that have been helpful to us while we've grieved or have seen as helpful to others? Or
I think remembering who God is too, and like what you tell yourself as well. Like one thing I found, I didn't really realize I was doing this consciously, but every time I began to think like, oh, God's so unfair, God's this or that, the other thing, I'd always stop myself and think, no, God is good, and His goodness isn't dependent upon my circumstances. So where's the goodness in this situation? I found that very beneficial.
almost like holding yourself accountable in how you talk to yourself.
Like what are you telling yourself all the time?
Yeah. I think we talked about that last month. Probably the person talking to you the most while you're grieving is yourself.
And having your thoughts shaped around God's word, not what you're feeling.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I think like reading Christian biographies too is really helpful, especially believers who have like suffered a lot, just to see how they did it and see the truths of God that they were depending on those
Yeah, reading good biographies of other people who've suffered in God's name and while following God. That's one of the ways that we can surround ourselves with good Christian people, right? We could even read good biographies from people who are dead, and they're still helping us, right? By the record of their life. There's some people still living, like Joni Eareckson Tada. She has a very short biography. I think it's an autobiography called An Unforgettable Story, I believe. And that one's incredible. It's a short book. She just explains her life of suffering with her physical condition and how she still grieves it today, but also how she looks to God throughout all of it. And so with that, we'll take a break and then we'll continue into talking about how to be that godly person helping others. Okay, so last month we first looked at the core principle of how when it comes to being around someone grieving, we just need to say something to begin with, right? And there's all sorts of things that could keep us from keeping quiet. We might say the wrong thing, we're worried, or whatever it may be. But the first principle that we started with is just say something, right? And then we moved on and looked into starting principles for what to think about when it comes to what we're going to say. So I'm just curious, which of those principles do we remember from last month, just off the top of our heads?
Not to make it about yourself.
Yeah. That one's quite difficult because it's way easier to talk about ourselves. And there are times where we might be invited to by the person grieving. And really the big thing we got from that was just don't try to take the easy way of talking to the person by talking to yourself. Right?
When you say you know how it feels.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't assume you know what the other person's feeling, because everybody grieves differently, and so everybody's experience is at least a little bit different. And we even went into how you shouldn't even assume you must be feeling so sad right now. Some people are relieved, and maybe they're experiencing joy in their grief, right?
I'm looking back at my notes, and one of them was, don't explain why God allowed this to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Was one of them just let them share, let them talk?
Yep, being slow to speak, quick to listen. Probably the case will be you're doing the least amount of talking between the two of you.
Don't ask questions to satisfy morbid curiosities.
Yeah, that was a big one. Not asking painful questions just to satisfy your curiosity. Exercising discipline. You don't need to say everything you're thinking all at once. It's a long haul. You can save some things for later. I struggle with that one. I need to say everything that's on my mind when it comes to my mind a lot of the time, and I talk too much. I'll just start listing off some others here. Don't compare their situation to others, or even just with statements like, well, it could be worse. That cheapens their experience, right? Don't feel the need to fix. we can leave some threads dangling for now. Not everything needs to be repaired immediately. Some things are just a useless check engine light, while others are the car's actually falling apart, right? That can be fixed later. Don't feel the need to hurry the other person. This is God's process, and we shouldn't try to hurry that process. Don't take the place of a parent but as a brother or sister, as in you're not just telling them what to do. What happens sometimes if people are suffering is you start looking at their state, pitying them, and then treating them like they can't take care of themselves. Esteem their grief. Let them know that it's legitimate, that they're sad over a loss, or even just saying things like it's okay to cry, right? And with that, don't be put off by tears. Got to learn a bit about how to do that today. So with these principles in mind, tonight we'll be looking at, more specifically, things that people typically say to others who are grieving and what we should say instead. So some things, they might even actually be okay, but they could be better, right? Or some things are just downright hurtful and shouldn't be said at all. And I suspect that as we're talking through some of these, some of us might feel like, wow, I've said that before. We can be gracious here. We're all sinners in need of God's saving grace. And this is a situation where we can learn how to do better for God's name, right? So we don't need to be down in the dumps if we said something wrong. I know as I'm preparing for these lessons, I'm constantly being reminded of how imperfect I am. But this is God's teaching us through this so we can learn from our mistakes and become more like Christ. And there's a sense where helping others while they grieve is a muscle that you have to grow and develop and exercise. And so it's something that we will just get better at over time. It probably won't be an immediate thing. So with all of this, what are some things that we can think of that people typically say and are not helpful or maybe even hurtful? They could be true even, but need to be said in a better way. What are some typical things that people say that aren't helpful?
Everything happens for a reason.
Everything happens for a reason. Yeah.
He or she's in a better place, even if there was no idea whether they're safe or not.
Yeah. We did talk about some last month too. We brought some up. But even just some cliches that aren't helpful.
We already said it, but I know what you're going through.
Yeah.
Or it's going to be okay.
Yeah, I know what you're going through. Yeah, I know what you're going through. I know how you feel. Like we've talked about, everybody experiences grief differently because everybody's a different individual person, and there's just God's appointed way that they're going to handle it and feel it and go through it. So the reality is, no, you don't. You don't know how they feel. You know how you felt if you've grieved before, right? So you're an expert in your own grieving, but not that person's. What might be something we could say instead?
I'm sorry for your loss. How may I help you?
Yeah?
Maybe make a suggestion instead of saying, how can I help you? Because typically people aren't going to say anything. They're just making a suggestion, can I bring you over a meal?
Yeah.
Can I drive you to an appointment or something? Or would you like to just get out for a bit and go for a drive or go for coffee sometime?
Yeah, we'll get back to that actually just after this one. When you think about what other things you could say instead of I know how you feel. Yeah. You guys are doing great tonight, but like spoiler alerts, you keep going ahead.
Instead of saying I know how you feel, ask how do you feel.
Yeah. And mean it. Like it could even just be something like a year later. It's like, what is your grief like these days? Right? And I think even if you say it, just how do you feel, even could be too open-ended. I think by saying things like, what is your grief like these days, you're giving them permission to admit that they're still grieving, if that makes sense. So they're able to open up about that more. So back to what you were saying, Doug, like instead of what can I do for you, or another one is just call me if you need something, right? There's a really good sentiment behind this. So I want to encourage that sentiment. But in framing it that way, what happens is you're putting the weight on the grieving person to decide where they need help, and also to take action to call you or ask you for it when they need it. So like Doug said, sometimes the best option is to just say like, hey, could I bring you a meal tonight? And I'm happy to say this church already does a pretty great job at this. When my mom died, we were in Nipawin for a week. We didn't have to worry about a single meal. Yeah, people just took care of us in that way, and we were able to just funeral plan and get affairs in order without anything else getting in the way. It was awesome.
Sometimes too, the person grieving doesn't even know what they would need or what they would find.
Yes, yeah. So what might the solution to that be if we're offering our help and they don't know what they need?
Tell them we're going to check back in a couple of days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you say, give me a call if you need something, and they call, and you say, I can't do that right now, that's really bad.
Yeah. Yeah, if you do say, give me a call when you need something, and you're actually not available when they call, that's really bad. Not just for your credibility, but if you're saying that in the name of Christ.
I'll be relieving them feeling too.
Yeah. Yeah. So this could come out in other ways where we just, we're all gifted in something that could be helpful to other people. So we could even just ask, like, hey, would it be helpful if I just took over mowing your lawn for the summer? I'm really good at doing taxes. Could I do that for you? Would it be a blessing if I came to your house and cleaned up or did your dishes? Right? The options are pretty much endless in terms of what we can offer for help, right? But I think just an important caveat to that is framing it as a question of, would this be a blessing to you? Because I know personally, Jerry and I would get quite anxious if someone just came into our house and started doing the dishes, right? And so if you ask first and say, would this be a blessing to you if I came and did your taxes or your dishes or your lawn or whatever it might be, or your laundry? That could be a huge help to them. We actually dipped our toes a bit too into how are you? Right? How are you feeling? That one's interesting because we're revealing that we care for that person and haven't forgotten about their grief, right? And it's not always the wrong thing to ask. But For some people, what the question can become is almost like a request for a job report on how they're doing better or improving in their grief. Some people feel like the expectations on them that they need to be feeling better if we ask them, how are you? Now, there are a lot of things that are misinterpreted while grieving, so we mean well. But really that just means we should put in the work to be more clear in what we're asking, right? So again, going back to, what is your grief like these days, right?
Dylan, I have a question.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's something you plan to bring up in the future or what, but like something I've wondered since last month was, how does any of this change, or does it change with like a child? Like, would any of this change if somebody wanted to ask Callie how she's doing? Because like just natural default, it feels insensitive to bring that up to a child, but maybe then we're neglecting them and there's some other way to follow up with them on their grief, right? And so, and we don't have, we can come back to that next month. I just, it's kind of in the back of my brain.
That's a really good question. I didn't really think of that. I'm thinking more about supporting adults who are grieving. But at least there does come a point where I think, you know what, we can ask children how they're, like the same things we would ask an adult. I think there are often times where, I don't think this is our case, but there are a lot of people who just don't give children credit for being as mature and smart as they are. And so there's a lot of times where you could ask the same things. I wonder if when they're younger, if it would be just helpful to talk with them and help them verbally process their emotions and what they're feeling. But that's something I should consider for future workshops. That's a great question. Thank you for that, Jordan.
You have to be very sensitive to the child and know them well to do it, because you're also then having to deal probably with parents who this child might come back to. But anyway, as you did for future discussion.
Yeah. So often the how are you question comes up as a way to keep checking on the person, right? And to keep being there, right? So the question, how are you, isn't necessarily bad, right? But some people could interpret it wrong or something. So what are some better ways we could say it? Or phrase that question, or better things we could ask?
I like to encourage forward thinking, just to break the inertia, because it's hard to do that.
Yeah.
Ministry capacity. So I'll ask something. I mean, it's not the same every time. Next time I'm coming, what, do you like butter tarts? Can I bring you butter tarts?
Yeah.
Something special.
Yeah.
Start to actually look forward to you.
Yeah.
Show up at the door without the butter tart. I told you.
Yeah. Look. Yeah. 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 A lot of this will require some forward thinking. Absolutely. Like even one of the alternatives to this question, I think, could be, hey, I know this milestone day is coming up. Is there anything that I can do to help you get through that day a little bit easier? Or would it help if I brought butter tarts on that day? And or even holidays. Would you care to join us for our Christmas meal? Because you're without your husband now, or something like that, right?
Or does it have to be in a question form, or
No.
just let them know, like even by text or phone call or in person, to just say, I just want you to know, like, I've been thinking about you and praying for you, and I'm going to be praying for you this week, knowing that this day is coming.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And even just little things like reminding them, hey, you know what? I just went biking, and I know how much this person loved biking. And I just want you to know that I miss them too. You know, something like that. Just a little affirmation that you recognize they're still grieving, and even that you're still grieving, perhaps. What are some other things that are unhelpful that people say, typically?
One thing my sister has heard a lot is get over it. You should be getting over it by now.
Yeah. Don't you think it's time to move on already? That sort of thing. And like we've said, grief does not have a set timeline because everyone experiences it differently, right? Probably by a lot of people's consideration, I grieve very quickly. I think, and once in a while something will come up, but it probably took me about 3 months in terms of getting used to my new normal without my mom. But contrast 3 months with a year and a half before Jerry started feeling more like herself, back to normal sort of thing. This is a process that God uses to grow his people, so we shouldn't rush God's process, right? What might be the alternatives to get over it, or shouldn't you move on already?
Not really an actual answer, but the first thought that came is literally anything else.
Yep.
Well, and if that's a thought you have in your head, rather than saying that, like, is there something, you're talking about forward thinking, but also just like helping them to do things to help them get over it in a sense, like not get over it, but move forward, like, you know, like do something together with them, or if you know the area they're struggling in, try to help them in that area rather than saying those words to them, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. Doing something to help them or encourage them to move forward in a healthy way, right?
Or even just giving them space to still be grieving after all those years too.
Yeah.
Like you say, there's no correct timeline, so
yeah.
If it takes them 10 years and another person 3 months, it's just what it is.
Yeah.
Dylan, how do you know the difference between someone who's making grieving their identity and someone who's just simply takes a long time to grieve?
That's a great question. How would you tell the difference between someone grieving their identity and sitting in it versus someone who just needs more time?
Very slowly.
Yeah, very slowly. Yeah, that's not a judgment you need to make right away. And I think, a lot of prayer. And that will, I believe, eventually just come out in how you see them dealing with it. Like we talked about ways of handling the pain. People who just make it their identity, they're typically ones who are going to the numbing or escapism to deal with the pain, versus someone who's taking a long time, but you see signs in their life of they're looking to God and they're trying to hold on to Him.
It's a danger of wallowing in self-pity because you like the attention.
Yeah, some people do that. Yeah.
I think one of the biggest things I would suggest, and this just comes from my experience, but to what extent is someone oriented to others? Are they looking to others? And now there may be a time in a season, and this came out after our our Romans 12 study a couple months ago. But there may be a season when someone says, man, I would love to be there for other people right now, but I just can't. I'm just hurting so much. But even just that heart inclination that says like, hey, like I'd love to go to the baby shower or the funeral, but it just hurts too much right now. I don't think I can. I would just cry through the whole thing and attract too much attention to myself. Just, yeah, that desire even that they could, if they would if they could, says something important. But someone who's, just kind of navel gazing and getting so wrapped up in themselves, I think that's a really unhealthy sign. And again, early stages, when someone's in the really early stages of grief, that's not the time to challenge them on that. But as time goes on, people may need to be challenged. Like, you need to get out and do some things with and for other people. And it's good. It's going to be good for them. It's going to be really good for you.
I think someone who's making it their identity too is like excusing everything on that all of the time.
Yeah.
So it's always about them. It's always about their grief. It's always this happened because I'm still grieving this or dealing with that. Like, I think somebody who it was just taking a long time. Yeah, I think it would be in a bit of a different headspace and maybe like what Chris was saying, but somebody who's got it, their identity is just, that's all they want to talk about or blame life on.
So if I could maybe condense that for the recording, you could probably tell by how much someone's life is geared towards themselves or towards being with and among others. Chris, would you say that's correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And gear is the right word because there's going to be times early on where it's healthy for them to recognize, like, I need some space by myself here. But the orientation is not inward but outward. And
yes.
not upward.
Yeah.
Because, like, Jesus gave us a command to love one another, and grieving doesn't excuse us from that. It's maybe a strong thing to say, but and the way that we love, of course, like we got to be realistic here. Like if I've had my leg taken out in an accident and my neighbor's moving, I'm not going to go help them move the next day. Right? Like, and so if you're like actively grieving a fresh loss, like, which for you fresh might be a few months, right? Like of course we got to be realistic here, but I'd be sitting there thinking, man, I wish I could help them move, and not like, yes, I don't have to help them move, and I'm just going to sit and mold my leg accident. So yeah, that inclination is really important.
Yeah. The orientation and inclination towards being there for others, whether you're able to or not. Yeah. So back to get over it. I think a good alternative would be, hey, you just take the time that you need to grieve in a healthy way, and I'm praying that you'll be able to experience joy sooner rather than later. Something along those lines, right? And you know what? We can experience joy even while we're grieving. Geraldine talked about that being a marked difference later on in her experience. But there are times where it just feels so joyless that just simply to say, I'm praying that God can bring you to the place where you'll experience joy again. And that also gives them permission to take the time they need, right? What are some other unhelpful things that people might say?
Well, Geraldine shared already that something hurtful to her was that people asking if they're a believer.
There is a sensitive way to ask that question, though, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. But
isn't that what you're asking? Like, how could we say that differently? Like, how could we?
Yeah. So we're thinking about this. What would have been something better? Because I think so too. It's, especially in the case where they are a Christian, that's a question that brings joy, right? So I think there should be room to ask it, but there could be a better way. And Jerilee did point to the fact that people knew her sister was an unbeliever from an unbelieving family. And so I don't know, do you have opinions on what might have been a better question to be asked, Jerilee?
I think like the hard part of it was just that there's people who knew my context and still asked if they knew the gospel, and it kind of put pressure on me to then like I didn't do a good enough job to evangelize versus just trusting the Lord in that, I guess, is more so. But like, I think it's fair to ask because like if they do know the Lord, there's so much hope in that, and there's so much to rejoice in. If that makes sense.
And even if they say weren't a believer, there's information that that can be gained so that you can help that person grieving, right? Doug?
They were unbelievers so far as you know.
Yeah.
With my wife's family, we went through a lot of losses there, starting with her grandmother right after we got married. And when her parents went, so far as we know, they died as unbelievers. That's only as far as we know. And they had a lot of exposure to the gospel through us and through others. Certainly, again, from a ministry standpoint, anytime I was dealing with people who, as far as they know, lost influence, Ephesians chapter 2, verse 7 is fantastic. The only reason God saves anybody is for his glory. And you don't know. There is one deathbed conversion in the Bible. There's only one, but there is one.
Mm-hmm.
And wouldn't it be a jaw dropper if I get to heaven and see my in-laws there? I'll tell you.
Yeah.
And Jesus will say, I did that, not you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as far as you know, I know my grandma on my dad's side was an unbeliever her whole life. And we did share the gospel with her at her deathbed, basically. And far as I knew, for a while, she died an unbeliever. I actually found out quite recently that she ended up calling my mom and saying, hey, I know God now. I think this is something that will come up in other things that are typically said. The big thing about a question like that is that it's not a question to ask in passing if you have 2 minutes. That's a question that needs to be asked with time to be there to comfort them and care for them, and not just to, again, satisfy curiosity. I think, would you agree with that? Is that... So that will come up in some of these phrases that are typically said, is some of them just need way more time than they're given.
Yeah, I think I would say, like, follow-up is that the question wasn't necessarily bad. It was just the follow-up definitely was, like, the hard part. Because it was just like, oh, that's a too bad, or, okay, well, whatever. And it was just kind of like a, that sucks, move on type deal. And it's like, okay, now I have to think about this. And you're going to the potluck and enjoying the food. And I'm sitting here. Type deal. Just an example.
Mm-hmm. So the problem is when it's said without the appropriate amount of time for the care required after. What are some other unhelpful things or cliches or whatever it may be that people typically say?
Could be worse.
Could be worse, yeah. Yeah. That often comes out in a, well, at least you still have this person in your life, right? That comes out in things like, well, at least you're young. You can get married again. Right?
People would say to us, when my mom was sick and died, and they'd say, I don't know why so many hard things happen to such a good family like you guys. That was always really not fun to hear.
Yeah. Yeah, it could be worse. Look on the bright side. Yep. And that comes out in ways like, at least he didn't suffer. At least we know where they are now.
They don't have to live through a world of all of this, like whenever they
Yeah.
were younger, like, oh wow, spared from this world. Like,
Yeah.
And those are true things for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
I mean that they're always helpful to hear at that time.
Yeah. Like if you think about, well, you're young, you can get married again. Well, I mean, if Geraldine was to die tomorrow, I was hoping to spend the rest of my life with her, right? That's ridiculous. I have hopes and dreams for our marriage. We have things that we want to do together. We have ways we want to serve God together. We have all sorts of things. Now, of course, we put those in the Lord's hands, right? But to suggest that the other person's replaceable like that, and you may not mean it that way, but that's absolutely what they're hearing. I think that also goes for people who are recently widowed. We don't ask if they're seeing someone. That just suggests that's what they should be doing to heal, right? Or that that's the solution to their pain, when it isn't. And we get to the, well, at least look on the bright side kind of stuff, and we want to end things on a happy note, right? We're uncomfortable with sadness, but sometimes we just need to stay in it. That's what's appropriate and healthy to do. And sometimes we say these things because, like you said, Damien, they're true. We want the person to have perspective. But that's not the way to do it. We can leave room for people to experience what it is to lament their loss, right? And you know what? If they say, well, you know what? I'm grateful for what I still have. You can 100% heartily agree with that person. I think the big thing is just we shouldn't be the first to be saying those things. Really, if well at least is what's going to start your sentence, maybe you just shouldn't say it at all. Connected to that, you can have more children though, right? That might be, but another child won't replace this one that they lost, right? Like Damien and Emily, it would be absurd if someone said if you had another baby that fixes everything that happened with Constance. And I think that example was actually shown quite well in how you guys were both rejoicing in Atticus and his birth, but mourning Constance and her death. Is that appropriate?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah. What are some typical ones that maybe we see on Facebook or maybe on a fun little meme or something?
Thoughts and prayers.
Thoughts and prayers, yeah. Sending good thoughts. It's great to tell people that you're praying for them, but honestly, the sending good thoughts one, that's quasi-spiritual talk that does nothing, right? And we're talking about grieving with hope as Christians. It's interesting to think that's the best the atheists have to offer. I'm sending good thoughts your way. Right? But as Christians, we believe in a powerful, sovereign God that we can pray to and can comfort people. So maybe we say, hey, I'm praying for you. And if you're with them in person, would it be all right if I prayed for you right now? Even just saying, hey, I'm praying for you, sometimes isn't enough. We should be able to say, hey, I'm praying for you, but can I pray for you right now with you, right? I think of cliches like, God doesn't give you more than you can handle.
God is working all things out for your good.
Yeah? We'll get to that. That's a good truth to know and be comforted by, but God's working your circumstances all out for your good. Yeah, we'll get back to that one. God doesn't give you more than you can handle. Far as I see, that's not actually biblical. God does give us more than we can handle, but no more than can be handled if we rely on Him and trust in Him, right? So God does give us more than we can handle sometimes to stretch us and grow us and grow our dependence on Him. Even something simple as 2 weeks ago, I was sick for a whole week, missed out on school, and could not focus enough to work on this workshop. But in that, God was stretching me and teaching me, hey, you need to rely on me some more here. You're depending on yourself too much. So, all of this to say, if we're going to say something, it better be biblical rather than just a cliche. I think some people have already said like you'll be okay or you'll be fine eventually. Jerry brought that up because that's what she was told about when her pets died, and then she said that to her dad. Comes out in ways like, you'll be fine, you're strong. Well, they might be strong, but right now they're feeling pretty weak. That person's life has drastically changed. Things are not fine, right? And this statement almost makes it seem like their loss shouldn't be enough to rock their world, right? Even if it's intended to be helpful.
Where does this, where do sympathy cards come into this picture? Because I find that a lot of the cards that you would send someone have a poem or some kind of writing on the front that's not really helpful, even though the person's not writing it. It's still the card they picked out for you. Where does this fall into the words that are helpful?
Sympathy cards. Well, it's kind of hard to get away from a lot of the ones that come with just cliches in them. But you could just, if you want, put in the effort to get something less like that. You can make your own. Or if it does have something, just make sure you write something actually thoughtful in it, is what I would say. I think people are sensible enough to know they didn't put that in the card. But we already do try to personalize it to the person when we're looking for one, right? So, what would be some alternatives to you'll be okay, you're strong?
Share a memory. Share a good memory.
Share a good memory. We're going to talk about that too. You guys are just doing great at spoiling the whole thing here. Yeah. I think just something like, hey, I can't imagine what you're going through right now, but I can be around when it's difficult, and also I'm praying for you, and I believe that God will give you what you need to face each day. Right? Rather than you'll be fine, it's just something simple. It's like, hey, God's with you. He has your back.
Instead of saying something that would get them thinking timeline, like when you say, you'll be okay, they start thinking, well, when should I, right? That dictates what they'll be and when, but yeah, just saying a blessing to them.
Mm-hmm.
So instead, God has your back is wonderful, but also even something like, may God give you strength for tomorrow. Like something that totally all the expectations are on the Lord, and not on them right now, especially with fresh grief. So.
Pretty much giving them a benediction instead. Yep. Yeah. Speaking a blessing that God has spoken in Scripture. Yep.
It's so beautiful because instead of just saying, I'm praying for you, or I will pray for you, you're actually expressing that prayer as you say it to them. Like, that's really what's going on with blessings. May God do this for you.
Yeah.
It's a really beautiful thing.
Another one that comes up sometimes. This one comes up especially if, say, someone's been taking care of their sick relative or friend for a very long time, and then they finally passed, and now they suddenly find they have all this free time because they don't have to take care of that person anymore. Some people will say to them, like, hey, at least you can do this and live your life now. And here's the thing. Going back to how sometimes we feel guilty about maybe discontinuing or continuing certain things that we participated in with the other person, there's a feeling of guilt with that. It's like, well, they're gone. How could I live my life? I would feel so guilty, right? So it feels wrong to have that freedom, at least for the first while they're grieving. And to them, it might feel like they're celebrating that person's gone, even though that's not at all what's happening. Again, perspectives get twisted a little bit. Some people just need time to recenter almost. And that's going back to the well, at least statements. The best alternative is probably to just be silent on those. Another one that comes up is, I would have liked to come to the funeral, but ... Why might that be unhelpful or hurtful?
Instant automatic admission. This thing took precedence over being present for you.
Yeah. It might.
About yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. It might not even be like that was more important. It's just sometimes reality kicks in and you just can't go, right? But.
Oh, okay, sorry. So maybe I missed the mark there. Are you saying that that's a...
Well, that's a good answer, because like really to the person grieving, no reason's good enough, right? Their world's being rocked and you weren't there. But instead, I think very simply it could just be, hey, I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm here now. And even just add it, I would love if you told me what was especially meaningful to you at that funeral. Right? Or even going a step further, and would it be meaningful to you if we watched the funeral video together? Right? So there's a way where you're apologizing that you couldn't be there, whether it was a legitimate reason or not, but you're still putting in the effort and showing them, hey, it's like my desire was to be there, and I will show that here, right? There's an interesting one that comes up particularly when parents lose a child, and that's people bringing up a statistic that most couples who lose a child end up getting divorced. Have any of you heard that before? Just curious. Okay. So this is a statistic that goes around that anywhere from 75 to 95% of couples that lose a child end up divorced. And so actually what happens to a lot of parents if they lose a child is they feel like their marriage is doomed. This was an interesting one to look at. The problem is that the statistic is totally made up. There was a woman who was grieving, and she wrote as a grieving person. I don't know the exact context, but I imagine it's something like, it feels like 90% of parents who lose a child get divorced, right? They're speaking from their personal experience, and that got picked up and spread around. And then she later said, hey, that wasn't legitimate. I don't know why you're using it. The evidence actually better supports that couples who lose a child are brought closer together. Actually, because only 15% of couples that experience, that's quite the difference, 75 to 95 down to 15. 15% of couples that experience the loss of a child end up divorced. And when you compare that to the divorce rate of about 52%, that's quite a difference. So instead of phony statistics, we could say, I'm so sorry that you lost your child, but I'm grateful you have each other. And I'm praying that God will help you guys as you comfort each other and come closer together.
Like with the difference between, because I know what you mean by that, but it might on the face of it sound like what we were saying we shouldn't do before, which is, well, at least you still have this person. So could the difference between that and what you're saying be like, praise God, he gave you a spouse who knows the Lord, that you can love each other. Just instead
Yeah. 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 Okay, and so someone brought it up. I said we'd get back to it. God works all things for the good of those who love him. Particularly looking at the statement, it was God's will. This is a tough one because God's sovereignty is shot through the Bible. It's absolutely a true thing that the Bible teaches us. And so we can mean well by trying to point to God's sovereignty. In fact, God's sovereignty was a foundational thing for Jerry and I in our grieving. But some things that might be communicated in that phrase is God is happy with what happened. Or God killed that person, not the drunk driver. Or that person's death is a good thing. So we get back to the problem that some things we say just require so much more time to care for the person. Right? So if we're going to say it was God's will as a passing statement, that could be incredibly hurtful. Even though all things happen according to God's will, or at least his decree. That needs to be qualified so much. Saying something like this requires open Bibles and intentional time to work through it. And it might even be best to start with sharing about God's goodness first. Because that God's goodness is why his sovereignty is a good thing. Right? There's so much that needs to be put in place for us to be able to rest in the reality that God planned grief for our life. But it's not for us to know exactly why in this life. Having said all this, in terms of what could be helpful to those who are grieving, there does come a point, and we talked a little bit about this in terms of, say, people making grieving their identity, but there comes a point where suffering can produce a selfishness or a skewed view of relationship, whether it be with others or with God in the person grieving. And there becomes a selfishness where certain grieving people only want to hear and will only receive what they want to hear. So Chris had already mentioned this a little bit, but there does come a time where in order to help people grieving, we might need to correct them and rebuke them. Job, at the beginning of the book, close to it, said, "The words of a despairing man is wind." As in, people who are grieving say things that they would not otherwise say, and we shouldn't always hold them to account for it. There is some room to let words go, but where there's clear error, there needs to be correction. And there is even still the reality that God will judge every careless word that we say, whether we're grieving or not. At the end of Job, God showed up and rebuked him for his careless words. But what's so striking about this rebuke is that in it, God revealed more of himself. He didn't really directly address what Job was saying. He just simply said, "Who are you compared to me?" By means of the rhetorical questions God asked Job, he was reminding Job of just who his God is. And actually, interestingly enough, in the process, God was caring for Job, not by telling him what he wanted to hear, but what he needed to hear, who God is. So there will come times, perhaps, that we need to do the same and help people to see God correctly where their view of him is faulty. And honestly, probably one of the first things to be hurt or damaged in the grieving process is people's view of God, if they don't have firm roots beforehand. It might be that people are in their grief, it's taking a while, and they're stuck, and they say one thing about God and act a different way, and you might just have to say, "Hey, do you believe that God is good?" "Yeah." Well, then maybe you need to start acting like it in your grief. So we've went through a lot of things about what not to say, what to say instead. In terms of looking at grieving people's experiences, there are two things that are found to be especially helpful. And one of the things that was mentioned already is share specific memories of the person that was lost. And that could also involve inviting that person to share specific memories about the person they lost and what was special about them. And it's helpful to esteem their grief by sharing how much you miss the person too, or expressing that you know it must be difficult for them to miss that person so much. And the second thing that's especially helpful is to keep saying the name of the person who died. To people who are grieving, hearing the name of the deceased from others is music to their ears. It can be something simple as, "Man, Ronnie was so good at barbecuing. I wish I asked him for some help and tips." Or, "Do you remember Susan's curly hair?" Or, "I really noticed the absence of Martha's voice singing the songs at church. I miss her." So we talked a lot about things, what to say, what not to say. Maybe we realize we've really blown it once or twice, or maybe a few more times. Or maybe we just didn't say anything at all. But to end off, I think I'll say this, that it's not too late to ask that person for forgiveness. Whether you wrong them by saying something hurtful or by not saying anything. Could be humbling and awkward, but most likely that will tear down whatever barrier has been put up by the hurtful or things you said or absence. I hope this has been helpful for all of you. I hope that we can leave being more like Jesus, especially as we help others grieve and as we grieve. And with that, I'll pray. Father, thank you that we get to come together and learn how to be more like your Son. Lord, I pray that you would work in our lives. Comfort us where we need to be comforted. Help us in comforting those who need to be comforted. Lord, may you teach us how we can be careful with our words and how we can be a blessing to others with them. Thank you for the example that your son Jesus set for us, and how he spoke to people, and how he counseled them. In your son's name I pray, amen.